If the Illini have any intentions of winning the Big Ten Conference, that path starts by beating the Hoosiers tonight. Locked On Illini. Let's go.
You are Locked On Illini, your daily podcast on the Illinois Fighting Illini. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Locked On Illini. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every single day. If you'd like to help support the channel, just find us on all your favorite social medias. Just do a quick search for Locked On Illini. Send a message, positive or negative. Just all I ask is to try to keep it constructive. Just know that when you send that message and when you get a message back, it's going to be me responding to you. If you'd like to support this show, hit that like button while you're here. And make sure you're subscribed to the channel. 62.5% of the people as of last Sunday who watch this content isn't subscribed. It doesn't cost you anything, but it helps this channel a great deal. Tuesday's episode, which, by the way, is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. I wanted to preview the Illinois versus Indiana Hoosiers game. Now, late Monday night, I released actually a second episode, which was really just previewing and focusing on the Indiana Hoosiers and their season thus far coming into 2024-2025. But because we didn't really have any updated KJ news at that point, I didn't want to spend too much time talking about Illinois because, let's be honest, it's hard to preview a game when the best player may or may not be playing and we don't have any information on it. Let's be honest, from everything that we've seen from Illinois, they are very much reliant on KJ to run that offense. Can the team get hot otherwise? Sure, absolutely. We saw that happen against Penn State. When the shots are falling, the need for Kasparas isn't as great. But the shots aren't always going to fall. And so if there's a close game and the time is starting to run out, that's when all of a sudden my faith in the Illini without Kasparas start to dwindle a little bit. Now, I do have a minor update on Kasparas Jakucionis' status. I wish it was more major, but right now, as I've mentioned, Illinois is being so mum about any details leaking. And let's be honest, why would Brad Underwood tell us at this point that he was healthy, right? Even if he's healthy today, why let Mike Woodson know that Kasparas Jakucionis is going to play? We just saw Eric Musselman in his press conference talk about how he was trying to soak up every detail on trying to find out if Kasparas was going to play or not. Mike Woodson, he's doing the same exact thing. It's a completely different team when Kasparas is on the floor as opposed to off the floor. So you want to keep the fog of war going if you're Brad Underwood. If you watched an episode a couple days ago where I was talking about the mystery of Kasparas' injury, I actually had someone in the comment section talk about that they read an interview that Kasparas did with a Lithuanian website where he actually talked about his injury. Now, for me, of course, as a content creator here, it's hard for me to I have to really verify this stuff, right, before I report on it. And, I appreciate you for listing that in the comment section, but I needed to see the article for myself. And you know what? I found it. And that article I'm going to be putting in the description of this video. So make sure you like the video and then just scroll down as you're listening to me, find it in the description, and you can read it for yourself. That is, if you know Lithuanian. I, of course, do not. But someone in the Locked On Illini Discord community, which, by the way, if you're not in, you absolutely should be joining by now. The link is also in the description. Did translate and dropped this note. Kasparas says about his injury, "It's nothing serious, just tendonitis in my left arm, but it's really not a big deal, and I plan to play in the next game. I didn't want to take any risks since my arm doesn't feel great. I think these next few days will help it fully heal." That's from the article. Again, I believe it's a Lithuanian basketball website, talking to Kasparas. Now, how much weight am I going to put in that article? Marginal. Of course, I would love for it to have been confirmed by a bigger source, something more reputable in the sense that I'm familiar with them, but it's my job to give you guys the information that I'm receiving. Now, where is my worry meter when it comes to Kasparas. 1 being not worried at all, 10 being I'm very, very worried. Right now, if he misses this Indiana game, I'm going to put it at 3.5, maybe 4. But I'll tell you, if he misses the game at Michigan State, now you're talking about almost 2 full weeks where he's been resting and he's missing games. That's when all of a sudden that worry meter is going to start creeping up to the 7, to the 8. And again, the longer we go without really getting any sort of information, just makes it more concerning by the day. But again, I don't expect Brad Underwood to give us any more information than he has to, because why? His job isn't to appease us fans. His job is to win basketball games. And this game against the Indiana Hoosiers is going to be a very, very important basketball game to win. So let's talk about the game in itself. Again, I'm going to just assume whether Kasparas is playing or not playing. These key factors are going to matter. It all starts with Oumar Ballo, right? I think the kid averages 14 and 10. He's massive. He's 7 foot, 260 pounds. He's a guy who certainly would have destroyed last year's Illinois basketball team. He got into a little trouble, as we talked about on Late Night Monday's episode, about him being at a bar midnight the day before a basketball game. But since then, he's just been terrorizing opponents. Quite simply, he's a monster big in the Big Ten Conference. And that's where I say the eyes are going to be focused on Tommy Avicic. He's a guy who I was praising very early in the season, and I've been a little critical of as of late. But I feel like I'm being fair with that, being critical about him, just because he's tended to struggle, especially since Big Ten season started, at least on the offensive end. Brad Underwood has been telling us that defensively, he's been the coach of the defense, and he's very vocal. I've equated it to the way Joakim Noah coached the Bulls defense during the Derrick Rose years. The thing is, though, Tommy Avicic, he's going to be needed in this. And my criticizing Tomislav had a lot to do with me eyeing this game. I love the idea that we had Tommy and Morez Johnson because they offered us a counter to other Big Ten teams who have monster bigs. The Indiana Hoosiers are one of those teams. What I'm worried about is I love Morez Johnson. You know this, if you're in the Discord, I say this at least once a day. He's going to be an absolute star. If he stays 3 years, you're talking about potential All-American. But he's a little undersized to guard Oumar Ballo. Tomislav isn't. Tomislav is 7'1", 260 pounds. He has the physical girth. He has the physical size to give Oumar Ballo troubles. But does he want to play physical? That's always been his issue. He doesn't play like he's 7 foot, 260 pounds. He plays like he's 6'11", 225 pounds. So that's going to be the key. Oumar, does he get his easy baskets down low? If anything, can Tomislav make a couple threes early and try to stretch out Ballo and make him play defense where he doesn't necessarily want to play defense? That's one thing that I'll definitely have my eye out on. The other thing is, and I'm going to be honest with you, there's a chance that Oumar Ballo has 35 points today, 16 rebounds, and the Illini still win. The reason being is I can see Brad Underwood all of a sudden saying, hey, Oumar, do your thing. Go ahead. As long as you work for those shots, as long as we don't make those shots easy for you and we have hands up and we contest them, we're going to let you score whatever points you want to score. Just make sure it's inefficiently when it comes to the Illini defense. What they don't want is someone else to catch fire the way it happened against USC and the way it happened against Washington. What I'm afraid of is a guy like Miles Rice, who Burke White, the guest on yesterday's show, was very high on coming into the season, saying that he had all Big Ten potential. A guy like Miles Rice, if he catches fire, we know that unfortunately one of Brad's weaknesses is that he just hesitates. He waits too long to adjust his strategies. And what I'm worried about is if Oumar gets 25, 30 points, but then we also have another kid also get 20 points out of nowhere, that's where I think Illinois really runs into some trouble, especially if the guy's shooting three-pointers. What the Illini defense is basically built around the opposition not doing. That's going to be one of my major concerns. Unfortunately, with the way Illinois is built, if Kasparas is not playing, we're going to need the Illini to get off to a very hot start. We're going to need them winning by 5, if not double digits, with 5-6 minutes remaining, because, as I talked about over the weekend, I don't know who to trust with the ball in hand at the end for the Illini if the game is close. If Kasparas has the ball, I feel good. Right now, when Kasparas is absent, who is it? Is it Kylan? Is it Trey White? I don't know. But it's one of those where until I see someone be able to step up and say, hey, I got it, I'm going to be nervous. And so my hope is that Illinois, who I believe as of this recording was a 3.5-point favorite, can build themselves up a pretty comfortable spread in that second half. And so we don't have to worry about one individual guy to be counted on to make a clutch shot or a clutch play. Let's just make it a team collaborative effort, or better yet, let's just announce that Kasparas Jakucionis is going to play before the game, and we won't have to worry about that. Speaking of the game, make sure you're liked and subscribed to the channel, because of course, I will go live immediately after the game. Either we're going to be celebrating together, or unfortunately, like the USC game, we can have a group therapy session where you say whatever you want, get off whatever hot takes you want. We have 24 hours to vent or celebrate, regardless, after the game. I do that after every basketball game, and I do that after every football game. It's something that I really enjoy doing with you guys. Sometimes we just need an outlet after a game ends. Attending the new 12-team college football playoff games is an incredible experience that brings fans together like never before. I remember the excitement of past playoff games and can't wait to make new memories with the updated format and extra teams involved. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time's Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, it's Tuesday here on Locked On Illini, and as always, every Tuesday during football season, I bring on my good friend Ted from the Big Ten Ted Show. Ted, thanks for coming on.
Hey, it's good to be here. Good to be here as always on another beautiful Tuesday. We were so close to having an all Big Ten championship, but it's Notre Dame is a Big Ten hockey member, so can we get in that somewhere? But either way. It should be a good matchup here coming up, which I'm sure we'll talk about between the Buckeyes and Irish.
Absolutely. I mean, we had some really good football games. In particular, that Notre Dame versus Penn State game was one of the finer games of all season long. And I'm not even talking about just the college football playoff, just in the college football season.
Yep.
And let's just start off talking about that one.
Sure. Yeah, that was a weird one, right? That game kind of took on many forms, right? The beginning of the game I thought was kind of like we expected, or maybe a lot of people expected. It was a defensive football game, low scoring, kind of smash mouth, certainly a little bit. I mean, it was no score at the end of the first quarter, and then you fast forward to the fourth quarter, and these teams put up a combined 31 points. And they get the scoring started. Once these offenses kind of figured it out a little bit, you certainly saw them get explosive. And then when you kind of go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, it was about who was going to make that one play. Who was going to make the one play? And, of course, it was the interception thrown across the field from Drew Aller. And it was just very uncharacteristic of what we've seen from Drew, not only from this season, but in his whole entire career. You don't see a lot of those gunslinger type of plays, especially in that situation. The game is tied. You can easily eat it, punt the football away, play for overtime, whatever, right? So it's not very Drew-like. But if you kind of look at this football game, this was, I think, was one of the poor games that Drew Aller played. You look at this early in the game. Remember where they're down? There was the first scoring drive. They kicked the field goal. He throws it at the knees and behind of Nick Singleton. Could Nick have maybe made that catch? Maybe maybe, but that's a situation. Like, that's an easy throw. That's an easy touchdown for 15 in blue and white, and he just didn't make the throw. And you really look at a lot of these things. He missed some deep balls down the field that maybe could have been bigger plays as well for Penn State. Like, this is a Penn State team that rushed for around 200 yards in this game. That's exactly what they needed to do. And when you look at the first half, Penn State was playing great football. Right, they held Notre Dame to just 15 rushing yards in the first half, and this is a Notre Dame rushing team that was probably the best rushing team in all of college football for most of the season, at least at the Power 4 type of level. And then once Notre Dame got the run game going in the second half, that's their MO. And if you're Ohio State, we'll talk about Ohio State here in just a minute. But you got to stop the run. If you stop the Notre Dame run game, right, that stops a lot of their offense. Now, we did see Riley Leonard certainly make some plays down the field, but that was kind of branching off of what they could do in the run game. Over 100 yards rushing in the second half for Notre Dame on the ground. This one hurts. It hurts for Penn State. Like, you looked at the bracket at the beginning, you thought they had a favorable path to probably get to the national championship game, and now we're sitting here again, talking about James Franklin, right? It's this narrative kind of coming up a little bit. And here's the thing is, I know that Penn in a big game, they came up short in that game, but in the Big Ten championship game against Oregon, I thought Drew Aller played one of his best games as a Penn State quarterback. They rushed the ball for nearly 300 yards. Like, that was one big game where a lot of Penn State really came to play. Now, the defense, they gave up a ton of points to the Ducks that specific day, but I think Penn State's players, and this goes back to coaching, this goes back to James Franklin, although I will not put a ton on this loss to James, but Penn State needs to show up bigger, more consistently, I would probably say, in these big games. I mentioned that Big Ten championship game where they played well, but you look at these Ohio State games the past couple of years, their offense just hasn't shown up, right? And you look at this game, right, where they made mistakes and they couldn't stay consistent on what they were doing in the first half. It's just it's another chapter written in the book. Right. I mean, what else can you say about this? What else can you say about James Franklin? You don't like to put a label on a program. I don't really like to do that, right? It's just, but now that it just happens time after time after time, and SMU and Boise State were top 10 CFP ranked teams, so there might be, at least from the top 10 level, you might say that. But once you start to jump up to that top 5 level, Penn State has trouble kind of getting over that hump. Right. Ohio State is a hump against Michigan, right? They've lost 4 straight games, no matter how good, like Ohio State, how good they were and how average Michigan was, yet they still couldn't get over that hump. Penn State hasn't done it since that 2016 crazy game against Ohio State. Drew Aller slated to come back. Their 2 backs might come back next season. So they'll probably be in a similar situation. They have the Buckeyes on the schedule next season as well. So it's certainly going to be interesting to see how this Penn State team adapts over the course of the season. I think it's apparent that they need to get better on the perimeter at receiver like that. That's certainly a big thing, I think, going forward for them as well. So, we're just sitting here again, and, fans of the Penn State Nittany Lions are kind of, they look at this season. I'm like, man, this was a really good season for Penn State. I know they really wanted that rematch, but, just coming up just short once again.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for James Franklin because I don't necessarily think he was the reason they lost, right? As you mentioned, no. Drew Aller had a very uncharacteristic Drew Aller game where he just made some mistakes. And if he just played a normal Drew Aller game, I think Penn State would have escaped with the victory. And then James Franklin would have been able to, to shed this label that, as you said, this book is, growing in regards to him. And, I think he'll get over the hump eventually, but the path was there this year.
But yeah, the like Drew is an interesting case study because when he's played, like I'm going to go back to that Big Ten championship, he made some big time throws in that game that allowed them, because what I forgot, Oregon got out to a lead early, and then Penn State comes roaring back because of Drew Aller and what he was able to do, making plays down the field. I know they ran the ball for over 300 yards. Talked about that already. But, I mean, remember when they were down inside the 30 and Mateo is grabbing his jersey and Drew stays up there and fires a bullet. Like, he had that gamer in him, and that was the game where maybe people are shifting. And I was kind of shifting. I'm like, okay, Drew is playing good football right now, and Penn State is playing good football. Although they came up short, I thought that they'd be able to carry that in, but Drew has been inconsistent over his career at Penn State. Sometimes you see it really good. Sometimes you see it not so good, right? So, you know, you mentioned those Ohio State games, certainly. So one thing that he really needs to work on to maybe improve his draft stock, certainly for next season, assuming he does indeed come back, is he just needs to be more consistent, right? You can't have these up games and then just kind of go down into the valley, so to speak. So he needs to be able to be more consistently good, not only for his draft stock, but for maybe Penn State to get over the hump in one of these big games.
We knew that Penn State Notre Dame was going to be a really good football game. I didn't think that Ohio State and Texas was going to be as close as it was. What did you think of that one?
You look at the defensive game plan from Texas, and there may be some folks out west that are pulling their hair out and saying, you look at two deep safeties playing off coverage and all of that, they're ripping their hair out and saying, how could we not have executed that type of game plan? I thought Texas did a really good job in what they did defensively. They came out and said, plain and simple, we are not getting beat over the top. We're not going to be Tennessee, and we're not going to be Oregon. That is not going to happen. Hey, whatever else happens in front of us, in front of the safeties, in front of the corners, in front of the nickels, whatever. Keep everything up in front of us. We got to tackle. And I thought Texas did a really good job at that to be able to stay in this football game. And it kind of proved when you keep everything in front of you, if you're defending Ohio State, sometimes they look a little bit human. Right, we saw Will Howard, throw an interception. We've seen him throw INTs in some of these key games, right, when teams are kind of playing better over the top, certainly. So that's what allowed Texas to kind of stay in this football game throughout this game. I thought, there's so many just key plays that really determine and swing this game back and forth. But I think one of the biggest plays was, when Texas tied that game up 7-7, and there was less than a minute to go, and Trevion Henderson takes a screen pass, 75 yards to the house? Because when Texas scored, I thought, okay, they got a lot of momentum. They're going to take this tie going into the locker room. And then, boom, right away when when Ohio State took it to the house in the very next possession, that was a huge momentum shift back, certainly into their favor. And when you talk about the Buckeye, you got to talk about another goal line stand this season. They are the goal line Goliaths, as I talked about in my reaction. Like, you want to go back. Remember that Nebraska game in the middle of the year? That was their first game without Josh Simmons at left tackle. Nebraska's defensive line was making life difficult for them. They weren't really moving the ball all that well on offense. Nebraska had a goal-to-go situation. They did go for it on fourth down. Ohio State came up with a huge stop to keep them in front in that game, and that really propelled them to a victory against the Cornhuskers in that game. Obviously, I think there were there were multiple goal line stands in the Penn State game earlier this season. Like, goal line stands were a big factor in Ohio State. They were one of the more difficult red zone defenses this season to go up against. I think Steve Sarkisian almost outthought himself down by the goal line. First and goal at the 1. If you can't get 1 yard in 4 plays running the football, you don't deserve to be in this situation to begin with, right? Your elite team should be able to gain 1 yard on 4 plays. I don't care whoever, I don't care if it's the 85 Bears front or whatever, right? You should be able to do that, right? And I thought, when they run that toss sweep to the far side of the field, I'm like, you can't do that against this team. You can't do that. Caleb Downs was the guy that made the play, but Lathan Ransom and some of these other guys in the defensive backfield are great at getting shot out of a cannon and making plays in the backfield in the run game. It just wasn't going to work. So you get behind the sticks, they get back of the 7 or 8 yard line. I thought, well, Quinn Ewers has been doing a good job, getting big plays with his arm and all that. And I thought, okay, maybe that gives them a little bit of first and goal at the 1 is a pretty darn good situation. But now they go back, and maybe Quinn's going to be able to make the play, and then Jack Sawyer sealed free meals for life in Columbus, Ohio, for himself, making an absolute great play. They mentioned on the broadcast, Jack Sawyer was the very first recruit of the Ryan Day era after he succeeded Urban Meyer. So what a moment. It's crazy. In about a month's time, we saw what we saw on the field against Michigan with Jack Sawyer, and now we see him making this play. This is the beauty of the 12-team era, the college football playoff era. That loss to Michigan in the previous regime, they would have been out, and they would have been dealing with that for the whole offseason. Now they get another shot, and they have certainly made the most of their other shot. But a competitive football game, Jeremiah Smith, 1 catch and 3 yards. Yet this is kind of the beauty of Ohio State's offense. Okay, you have 1 catch for 3 yards. Emeka Buka has 5 catches. That's great. But then you have Carnell Tate, who'd be a number 1 receiver on like 125 other teams in college football, and he has 7 catches. I believe it was the most catches that he's had in a game all year long. So if option 1 and option 2 aren't going, now you go to option 3, and option 3 is pretty darn good, and that's why Ohio State is going to be playing for a national title.
Speaking of the national title, let's talk about that right after this. Whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or just want to give your space a new look to start the year, Wayfair has everything you need, all within your budget. As most of you know, I just completed a cross-country move, and I'm looking for furniture, and their huge selection makes it easy to find pieces that fit my style and my budget. My favorite part, the free and hassle-free delivery. Even for the larger items, Wayfair's site was so easy to navigate, and I found everything I needed in no time. There's something for every style and every home, no matter your space or your budget. Wayfair makes it easy to tackle your New Year's home goals with endless inspiration for every space. Give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair. Every style, every home. All right, Ted, I kind of want to piggyback off that last segment where we're talking about how, Ohio State was a 6.5, sometimes 7-point favorite over Texas.
Yep.
In some ways, I think having a game as close as it was, coming down to the last couple minutes, it just being a 1-score game, could have been the best thing possible for the Buckeyes, because once again, they're big-time favorites over Notre Dame. I think last I saw was 9.5 points. Obviously, very strong favorites. Notre Dame could be missing key guys on their offensive line. So the narrative is going to be, Ohio State should have a cakewalk over the Irish. But a lot of people were saying the same thing against the Longhorns. And you and I talked about that last week. The fact that the spread was as small as, as it was. And for me, it was just like Vegas doesn't lose money on games like that. And sure enough, we saw ultimately they did cover the spread, but the game itself was a lot closer than the final score. Let me know what you think of Ohio State going up against Notre Dame.
Oh, boy. Notre Dame is just, they're just, I don't think the Irish are overly talented. I mean, the talent advantage clearly is in the favor of the Buckeyes. I think that's very clear about this football game. But there's something about this Notre Dame team. Well, Marcus Freeman, I think, he's a fantastic head football coach right now at Notre Dame. And he just has these guys. You look at the situation that they were in against Penn State, and they find a way to flip it. And then I think Riley Leonard at quarterback, this kid's just a gamer. Like, I remember watching him when he was at Duke. They upset like Clemson in the first week of the season a couple of years ago, I think it was. And, this is a guy that's, it's kind of a microcosm of what I just mentioned about Notre Dame. He's not overly talented, right? But he just finds a way to make big plays at the key moments. The big key for Notre Dame, obviously, in this game is going to be a lot like what Texas did. Can they keep the plays in front of them? Can they limit the explosives? That's the MO now when you face off against this Ohio State team. If Notre Dame can keep this game into a box a little bit, right? I think that that creates I don't want to say that gives them an advantage, because Ohio State can play really in any box that they choose to play in, but right. It gives them a fighting chance. It gives the Fighting Irish a fighting chance as this game goes along. The more that this game stays closer, I think the more confident that Notre Dame will become as this game really goes along. I think Ohio State is going to try to do what they did in some of these other games. They're going to try to hit that knockout punch early on in this football game as well. Keep in mind some of the injuries on the offensive line that Notre Dame suffered, right, in that game against Penn State. I'll have to look up what the status of some of those guys are and what the injury report looks like for this national championship game coming up on the 20th. But Ohio State, we know what their defensive line is, right? We know what they can do. We know the type of havoc that they can wreak. Like, you look at that game, Quinn Ewers was always bouncing around. He was always stepping up, going to the left, stepping up, going to the right. It was very rarely a clean pocket back there for Quinn. So, right, that's if Notre Dame is a little bit shorthanded on the offensive line, that could make life really tough for Riley Leonard. For Ohio State, it's fairly simple, right? You need to find a way to stop the run game, right? We just talked about it with Penn State, what they did in the first half. They were doing well in the first half because Notre Dame only rushed for 15 yards. And like, for his, I talked about Riley Leonard kind of being a gamer back there, but you put the ball into his hands and solely his hands. I think that's an advantage that Ohio State feels very good about, right? I don't think that this wide receiver group is going to separate all that consistently against Ohio State's defensive backs, right? But it's a 9.5 point spread for a national championship is insane. It's insane. But I don't know, something tells me I feel that Notre Dame is going to find a way to cover this game. I don't know. I just think that they are disciplined, very fundamentally sound. And I think they're going to look at what Texas did, is that they're going to try to replicate that. And you get Ohio State to play in a box, as I said before. Now it's all about making plays. Notre Dame made plays in the game against Penn State. We'll see. And you saw Ohio State in a close game make plays against Texas. And obviously they came out onto the winning edge in that one. I think it's going to be a really fun game in that one. I'm very curious to see if Lou Holtz is going to be there, see if him and Ryan Day, we get to have an interaction there. I read somewhere that Ryan Day hasn't spoken to Lou Holtz since that game a couple of years back. So I'm really looking forward to this football game. I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to have a little bit of that Big Ten defensive, physicality within it. So I think it's going to be really fun.
Yeah, this is one of those games that on paper to me, again, Ohio State should come out victorious.
Right.
I've said it before, after that Michigan game, after that loss to Oregon this year, it would just be the beauty of college football, at least for me, to have Ohio State when everyone essentially wanted Ryan Day gone. Even friends of mine, family of mine, said that there was no recovering for Ryan Day for losing the game yet again. And here we are, basically just now 60 minutes away from being crowned national champions, which, of course, was the goal as soon as Michigan won it last year. As soon as Michigan won it last year, the Ohio State Buckeyes and the NIL, everything, they just kicked it up a notch. They sought out the best talent. No price was too high. And you're looking at the fruits of all that now. And again, they do have a couple losses. And, whether they deserve to be in the college football final after not winning, their conference, that's the conversation you and I will have about the system maybe in the offseason.
Sure.
But they're here. And to me, I've been saying it for the past 6 weeks or so, they're the best team in the country. Now it just comes down to whether they're going to be the best team on Monday night, January 20th.
Yeah, I know that exactly. That's what this all comes down to. And, this is going to be a great building off point for the format, right? And of course, we're going to get into like you said, into those conversations during this offseason. I'll talk about it on my side during this offseason as well. But I'm going to be talking about it this week, where I'm like, this is kind of the beauty of this era. There were certainly some positives to the old format with the BCS and then eventually the 4-team college football playoff. But this is now a format where you can lose multiple games, right? Before it was, especially in the portal era, the 4-team college football playoff era, right, where we had the transfer portal and then where we had this 14 playoff. It was, hey, we got to go out. We got to get transfers. We got to be able to plug these holes. We don't have time for these young guys to maybe develop. We need experienced players. Now you maybe, and I don't know if this is necessarily relates to Ohio State, but it could relate to some other teams where it's like, if we have some young players and we take a couple of lumps early in the season, but by the time we get to game 10, 11, 12, we're going to be good. We're going to be really good. So football coaches around the country are going to be looking at it's very NFL style. How are we playing our best from like November 15th on? That's where we want to be. If we're 6-2 at the beginning of November, how do we get to 10-2 at the end of the season? Right? Because now I think a lot of people are looking at these bye weeks and be like, ooh, yeah, those 3 weeks off, those 4 weeks off. No, we want momentum. Mm-hmm. We want momentum, right? So those conference championships, I think this year proved it's kind of like, hey, if we get it, great. If we don't, that run towards a national championship and getting hot at the right time like Ohio State did, that's more important to hoisting the trophy when all is said and done.
1 week of college football left. Ted, what do you got going on your channel?
Oh, yeah, we're going to be breaking this one down a little bit, and we're going to be talking about what we just talked about as well, along with, hey, the complications for the Buckeyes. Okay, so they lose to Michigan for the 4th consecutive year, and all looked like it was going to be done. But does a national championship for Ohio State erase that failure? It's a complicated topic. Going to be breaking that one down certainly this week. And to be breaking that, now we've kind of gotten a month into about the transfer portal, right? We've got, I know we're going to still have some of these championship teams where there could be some portal guys, but for the most part, we've kind of got a good gauge in the portal. So I'm going to be talking about which teams have maybe done enough to build themselves forward and done the best so far in the portal. So we're going to be talking about that as well, but it's crazy. We've got 1 game left. It's insane, but I think it's going to be a really good game. A lot of fun stuff certainly coming up, so I'm looking forward to it.
Best in the world, Ted. See you next week.
All right, sounds good.
And that'll wrap it up for today's edition of Locked On Illini. Again, Indiana versus Illinois, 6 p.m. Central from Bloomington. It's going to be a game that I think Illinois is going to have to win, especially coming off of a loss. You don't want to risk having a 2-game losing streak going up against Michigan State, who as of this day is undefeated. Make sure you're tuned in to Locked On Illini. As soon as the game is over, I'll be going live, and hopefully we get a chance to celebrate together. If not, we can always console each other and have a therapy session. Until I'll see you all after the game. ILL. Love you guys.